I'm Jesse Lubinsky.
I'm Donnie Piercy.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Heil, hosts of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. I am excited to be here with you all on this wonderful Tuesday evening, or it may be well into Wednesday, depending on where you're joining us in the world. But wherever you're joining us from, thank you as always from the bottom of my heart for making My EdTech Life part of your day, part of your listening pleasure, part of your podcast queue or your YouTube queue. Thank you, as always, for your support. As you know, our mission is to always connect educators and creators one show at a time. So thank you so much for all of the love. And today I'm just really excited because we have an amazing guest with just a wealth of experience, obviously, years of experience, who's doing some amazing work. And I'm just really excited to dive in and to talk to our wonderful guest who is joining us. And we please welcome Ginger Dewey to the show. So, Ginger, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. It's finally not roasting in South Carolina, which is a good thing because we have had the excessive heat. Not like Texas, but we've had a lot.
Oh my goodness. Yo, you're telling me, here I was driving home and I thought my vehicle's little thermometer reader was broken because I kept driving and usually, you leave your car parked out for a while and you get in, you turn it on and it's like, oh yeah, it's like 106. I was like, okay, once I keep driving, I'll get the true temperature. And I was like, hey, this thing never went down. Like, what's going on? And I mean, we're just feeling this heat. So, yeah, with Texas heat, it's been definitely very hot. But again, Ginger, thank you so much for joining. And I just also want to welcome my dear friend Tanya Gonzalez, who's joining us here on the show. Tanya, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really excited about today's topic as you're joining us here. And of course, the title of the episode today is Transforming Education, a Mission for Universal Accessibility. And before we get to talking about the meat of the matter here, as far as accessibility is concerned, and talking about Read Speaker, Ginger, for all of our audience members that are joining us here that are very familiar with the show, would they all know that we always start with that superhero origin story. And as you know, every superhero has a beginning, and every person that is a guest on the My EdTech Life show is likened to a superhero because of the work that they're doing and their contributions to the education space. So, for our audience members that are joining us, and maybe those who may not know of your work yet, Ginger, can you give us a introduction and share with us a little bit about your context in education?
Well, first off, I loved music, I loved phys ed, and I loved math. So when I went to college, I tried to figure out what was I going to do. Well, I thought about it and I didn't want to teach music and I wasn't good enough to play in a band. So that kind of took that major away. Then I looked at phys ed and said, well, I can teach it or I can teach it. There wasn't much else to do with that. So I decided math gave me some versatility and I could do everything in math from teaching to corporate work to statistical work. And my love was um, statistics and computer programming. I also enjoyed chemistry. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do something with that. Senior real senior year rolls around and I have to make some very hard decisions, as you can guess, about the real world. What was I going to do and where was my money going to come from to pay for a car that wasn't going to break down every day? So, um, I had 2 job offers. One of them was computer programming for a national bank. I would be writing interface to go between the different systems. It was $40,000 a year, and a month vacation. Now, that's pretty good start in money, especially back in 1980. So that was real good money. Or I could start teaching, have 3 months off unpaid, but I would only be making $11,000 a year. And I went back and forth and back and forth. And my mom basically slapped me upside the head and said, "Think about this, Ginger. Can you go from $40,000 a year down to $11,000 a year and still live the lifestyle you've set up for yourself?" It took about 2 seconds for me to say no. And the company that wanted me to write interface gave me a 2-year open window for me to come back. And I decided I would teach. I would give it the 2 years, and if I wasn't happy, I would go back and re-interview with the company that said, 2 years, you can come back. And I thought, okay, 1 year, 9 months, I'll go interview. I'll have mom off my back. And I found out, kind of liked it. I liked the teaching. I liked the challenge. I liked the light bulbs going off in the students' faces. And I taught at would be called a middle school now, but it was called a junior high then. It was 7th and 8th grade, and I had taught 8th graders. There were only 2 8th grade math teachers there. So that kind of kept everything, a lot of networking between me and the other lady because we were both fresh out of college. Neither one of us knew what we were doing. So we had to make it work, and we did. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed giving students real world experience. When the solar eclipse happened back then, we went outside and experienced it. And then we talked about the mathematics of it when we came back in. Much simplified, but mathematics of it. After 4 years, I thought I cannot deal with one more student's crying jag because they broke up with their boyfriend or their boyfriend broke up with them or whatever. There was just too much hormones in 8th graders. That was not my cup of tea whatsoever. So I looked around and a local technical college was hiring, and I was lucky enough to get the position. And in technical colleges, we take the students basically from where they are up through calculus. They don't have to start at a college algebra level. We have a lot of levels of math that are below that. In fact, one of them that we had at the time was equal to 8th grade general math. And I thought, this is it. I like this. I like the topic. And no one else wanted to teach it. So I was happy to teach it because you can get your hands messy with it. Then we started offering statistics, and everyone knew when I was teaching a new unit because we would have paper airplanes flying down the hallway, getting data. We were tossing frisbees. You just never knew what I was going to be doing. In fact, my boss walked out and said, "And what are we studying this week?" when he saw a paper airplane fly by his nose. And I just said, "Frank, don't walk out right then." So it's things like that, letting the students feel the math, then they can engage in it. And I stayed there for a long time. And eventually I was beginning to burn out of just teaching math. And I needed that computer programming side of me. Well, luckily enough, got the position of instructional specialist, which meant I got to work with a lot of the softwares that you create lessons with and you do other type things with MP3s, MP4s, the whole 9 yards. That answered that calling. And we came up with online courses, and I was one of the first to offer an online course. So I started building back those computer skills, and it was meeting all those needs that I had within me. And that made it fun. And then I found out that there were some students with disabilities. And I don't like to use the word disability. I like to say learn differently or learning challenge. But these students, I was good friends with the special resource office at the college, and asked me, "What would you do if you had to teach someone who was blind?" And I said, "Well, I'd make them feel it. You know, that's their way of doing it is feeling, so they would feel the math." And they were kind of intrigued by that. So I started ending up with all the students that had severe learning challenges. I had the blind, the deaf, those that were partially blind or partially deaf. They ended up in my classes, and we found ways for them to engage. And that led way to me being a distance learning department manager and over our learning management system. And when I decided it was time for my exit strategy, I'd been teaching long enough, and South Carolina had this crazy thing called a Terry program. Now, how we got away with it for as many years as we did, I don't know. But we did, and Terry allowed you to work 5 years after you retired, and your retirement funds went into an escrow account while you still drew your regular paycheck. So you were double dipping for 5 years. And Terry was running out. So I thought, okay, I need an exit strategy and I'm not ready to quit work. And in the introductions to my the lady who took my place, I was introducing her to all of our vendors. I was lucky enough that Reed Speaker was hiring and wanted me. And I was like, hey, this is good because it's faculty training. And I love that. So it just sort of everything has fallen in place my whole life of getting from what type job do I want to where am I now?
Wow, that is amazing. And I mean, just all the experience that you talked about, there's so much to unpack. And I definitely want to unpack a little bit of what you said that really just stood out. And of course, we're definitely going to be talking about the current work that you're doing with Reed Speaker. But I want to dive in a little bit more into your experience that you mentioned where you were working with students that needed some additional supports. And one thing that I love that you said, first of all, when you talked about the solar system and as a math teacher coming in and just making those connections, how relevant and how powerful that is to actually see it and then talk about it, have some
Hmm.
discourse, discuss, ideate, and just everybody can go ahead and share their ideas and concepts of what their thought process is. And I think that's so powerful. And I think that many times that's something that is lacking in our classrooms, the ability to be a little bit more student centered as opposed to teacher centered. And I completely understand that in the sense that there is curriculum that needs to be done and you have to, be at a certain point at a certain time. But I believe that the return on investment is definitely huge. In my own experience, the way that you described your method of teaching, oh my gosh, it just takes me back to my classroom, with fifth and sixth graders running up and down the halls, racing cars, Hot Wheels in the halls. And teachers are like, you guys are too loud, but we're doing science, we're learning, we're going
Exactly.
outside. Yeah, we're going outside with our devices and recording, grass and making observations and, doing all our scientific notations in our notebooks and then digital notebooks and so on, and just really making those connections. And that is so important. And you know what? Right now that you said, when you had a student that was not able to see, visually impaired,
Mhm.
and how are you going to teach them? And you said, well, you make them or you help them feel the math. And that I think still is relative today, whether
Oh,
it's a student who may be visually impaired or not, because I see that many teachers teach the math in a very abstract fashion. And I'm more of a concrete, with manipulatives, and then move to pictorial representations and then
hmm
obviously moving into the abstract. But I think that that is so powerful. So, Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience? I know you kind of briefly went over that, but coming in from your background, I want to ask, what was it about that those skills that you had in your background that you feel were very instrumental into, your shift into education and working with students that needed additional supports?
Curiosity. That it's not a skill, but it's a trait. I'm a very curious person. And I love to get down in the weeds. The big picture sometimes eludes me, but the weeds are my friend. In fact, the roots of the weeds are my friend. And if I can help someone understand the root, then they can grow and flourish. And that's how I like to look at education. You've got to feed the root so the plant can grow. And when I was working with my student that had absolutely no sight and had not had sight since she was like 2, 3, 4 years old. And here she was an adult by the time I had her. Um, she was taking college algebra. And if you know anything about college algebra, it's a lot of graph based work. And I had to figure out how to teach her to graph. Well, we found something that was called oh gosh, I've forgotten its real name now, but basically it was a set of 10 with raised grids on it. Okay. And you took something sort of like poster tack and rolled it into a thin line and drew your graph with it. About $120, $130 back ordered for a year. So that kind of ended that idea. And I went home. I was irked because you couldn't get it. So I said, what can I do that I can get? So I went out to our favorite Wally World and bought me a 2 foot by 4 foot whiteboard. And I marked it off in half-inch grid and put push pins all over it to make the grid. Then I got 3 or 4 different weights of yarn, and one weight I put in the X and Y axis. And then I taught her how to find the center, find the origin, and then count out where she needed it. And she'd wrap the yarn around the push pins. And if we were doing like shifts and stuff like that, she would have a different weight of yarn that she would then shift it with and could feel the difference. And amazingly enough, at the end of the semester, she had taught me how to read Braille. Not well, but I could read Braille because she'd do her homework in Braille. And then I'd have to have her read it to me so I could write the written view for those of us who don't need Braille, write that out. And eventually I got to where said, I want to try it. So I started reading her Braille and she'd tell me when I did something wrong, said something wrong. So I learned from her and she learned from me. So it felt like a two-way street. And that was one of the first things that really wrapped my heart around students that learn differently because I saw how well she learned and how much better she was doing than a lot of the students that could see. And I thought, if I can teach someone who can't see, I've got to find a way to get to those that can see. And that made me curious, more curious, and also made me want to think really outside the box. So I took methods courses. I did research online just to find different ways to teach things that maybe someone else did. And I might take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it together, hope it fit, and go from there.
I absolutely love that. Just the way that you explain that is very powerful. And one thing that I love that you mentioned there at the end is I always kind of say something like that to everybody here that listens to the show. It's like, take a little bit of every guest and sprinkle it onto what you're already doing great. But
Exactly.
I love what you said, being curious. And, again, it resonates so much with me because I came in from a business background into education. And so for me, a lot of those skills were easily transferable, which mainly was, the personalization due to my experience with customer service. It's like I
Mhm.
have 30 little customers that I have to sell this subject to, and not everybody's going to buy it the same way. So I can definitely see the way that you worked in that aspect too, as well, is like, hey, let's figure out how I can teach my student who may need an additional support or accommodation. But hey, you know what? This method too can easily be used for students that may not have or need additional supports or things of that sort. So I love what you said there. So I want to ask you, in your experience that you've had, which I can see is a wonderful experience, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, I'm sure that many of the students that you've had are completely gracious for all the work that you've done. But I want to ask you, what is meant by tools specifically designed for accommodations being a learning tool for everyone? Because we always hear the phrase, universal design for learning, or we hear, we want to make sure that everybody has equal access to all of the learning. So, in your experience, can you tell us a little bit about what that means to you?
Well, I want to back up one step,
Okay.
and that was part of the last part of my tenure at the technical college. I worked a lot with online accessibility, and that's where I sort of drew on the love of universal design for learning. I'd never heard of it until about 6, 7 years before I left the technical college. So I'd been doing it. I just didn't know I had been doing it. And someone finally put a name on it. And I was like, cool. Okay. But the thing that I looked at is in helping some students that had a challenge, I found out other students were able to use that tool and excel with it, even though they didn't have a quote disability or they did not learn differently. And some of the tools that pop into my mind immediately. You ever had that course where you just felt like your head was hitting the brick wall? You could not learn it. Educational psychology, that was my brick wall. It made no sense to me, and there was too much detail for me to grab. And for a person who lives in the roots of the weeds, that's a lot of detail if I can't grab it. Or maybe it was such big picture I couldn't grab it. But anyhow, something that I've learned in working with text to speech are different ways you can use the tools, not just for learning differently. And if you take enlarged text and you slow the reading speed down by 5%, you grab minute details that you miss otherwise. Now, the way ReadSpeaker works, we highlight the words as they're being read. So you've got this big, I always use a yellow sentence with a bright blue word. So I have a big yellow sentence with uh, blue words popping along, and we deliver up to a comma or an ending punctuation in that enlarged text. So you're grabbing each one of those phrases that's coming up and you see things that you would not see otherwise. And by see, I mean see and hear, receive, retain. And that is a tool for that brick wall. The same feature, the same set of using the enlarged text and slowing the reading speed down by 5% helps a student who's learning a second language, whether that's learning English or learning Spanish or French or German or whatever. The trouble that they run into, I'll use Spanish for an example. The accent is typically on the ending syllable in Spanish. In English, the accent is on the first or the second syllable typically. A lot of times, Spanish speakers learning English stop listening after the accent and are moving to the next word. So they're not hearing the ending of the English word. By slowing it down 5%, them seeing that the blue square is still sitting on that word, they grab, oh, there's more to that word, and they start putting it together. The same can be said about French, German, all the other languages. Your accent or the fact there is no accent, for instance, in Swedish, they don't accent any syllable. It's very hard for me to say Swedish names because I want to put an accent in them. But, you know, it's there. So you have to figure out how to get that whole thing. So if you have someone who is Swedish trying to learn Spanish, they've got a problem because one has no accent, one has an accent. So they have to know where that change for the word goes. So that's a learning differently and a skill to help you get across the brick wall. It can also help you re engage when you have screen fatigue. Changing the voice. I have a slight hearing deficit and I lost 5 of my deeper tones. Happens to be my husband's tones. He says that I just listen selectively. And I say, no, honey, you whisper and I can't hear it. You got to put your voice up a little higher for me to hear you. And he just rolls his eyes at me. But, it is what it is. But we have one voice that touches on some of those tones. So I tend not to use that voice when I'm listening to things because I know I'm going to lose a word here or there. So that's one reason why we offer multiple voices. So you pick what you're comfortable with. And that comfort range could be you might have a female voice for one class, a male voice for a different class, a different male voice for a third class, a different female voice for a fourth class, because some people remember the voice and can remember the voice saying certain things. And they go back and they recall that. So by having different voices, they can say, okay, that was such and such voice saying it. That was such and such class. That's what I've got to do for my homework or something like that. They pull it back by the voice. And typically that's an auditory learner. My daughter is a severe auditory learner. She 7 to 13 is the 99.7% range for all learners to fit within that nice pretty bell curve. She hit 15 for auditory and 5 for everything else. I had laryngitis her entire childhood until she got to a point she could read well enough on her own to read it out loud. I would have loved to have had Read Speaker then and had her books read out loud to her instead of me sitting on the couch every night going, okay, get me a Halls, get me a cough drop. Got to have something here to get through this. So having a child that is an auditory learner taught me a lot about auditory learning and the fact that I could do whatever I wanted. You probably have noticed I talk with my hands. I am a good Southerner. Hands are part of your speech.
Yeah.
I could do as much as I wanted with my hands, but if I didn't say it out loud, it didn't resonate with her. But I could say something out loud and it would stay with her the whole time. So when I look at tools that help students, the enlarged text, the reading speed, that really helps in so many different ways. But there are other tools. My son had difficulty learning how to read. And they use cut a hole in a sheet of paper and move it up and down on the book. Well, that helped him wonderfully. And he started reading like a rabbit. I mean, just flying through stuff. Well, the funny about it is when you get into electronic tools, there's something called a page mask. And you can make it as wide or as narrow as you want it and move it up and down on your page. It's the exact same paper tool that you're using. The beauty of it is you can make it smaller without having to get a new sheet of paper. Because once you cut the hole in the paper, you can't make it smaller. But the electronic one, you can. Then there's a reading ruler, keeps you online. If you're using a large screen, and most of us either work on something about the size of your cell phone or you work on a 24, 48-inch monitor. We either go big or we go small. There's not much in between. But when you're on one of these great big monitors and you go all the way to the right and you come back to the left, there's a good probability you're not going to be on the correct line. So using the idea of a note card, which we call a reading ruler, keeps you online. So there's all these things. Yes, they're focus tools. Yes, they are accommodations, but they're also good for everyone else. So that's the type thing that I look at when you talk about what is an accommodation tool that everyone's going to use. Well, we've all heard the curb effect. With it, how many people ride their bicycle over the hollowed out curb that's made for wheelchairs, or push a stroller through it, or use the electric doors at an airport or at a grocery store or something like that? That's the curb cut effect. You're using something that was intended for someone else, but you're finding benefit of it. There's a recent statistic that said that undergraduates in the United States, 5% qualify for accommodations. 18% use the tools that are there for those that need accommodations if they're made open to other students. 18% are using them. That's 13% of your undergraduate population in the United States that are using accommodation tools because they like them, not because they have to have them.
And that's so powerful. Everything that you said right now just kind of helps me make more sense and really understand more, how it is that we need to pay attention to a lot of the tools that are out there. Because like you said, these tools don't just benefit those that need it. There's some great benefit even for the students that may not need it. And like, I've had Katie Novak on the show. She talked about universal design, and she'll say something like, if it's good for one, it's good for all. And obviously her thing was, it's like, if the student needs the accommodation, the goal is that you work with them, and then eventually for those students that don't really need it when it comes time to test, they can easily just say, hey, you know what, this isn't something that I need, but it's helpful. They can visualize those things, those tools, and of course everybody gets that added benefit. One thing that I see here is that working in a school district or working in a school education for 16 years now, is that there's always kind of like a negative connotation when it comes to accommodations, where, obviously the students feel singled out. But
Mhm.
then at the same time, teachers don't realize, or maybe they may not think the way that you do, in the sense of, hey, just because a student may need a certain accommodation doesn't mean that even my student without accommodations could find this useful. And it's almost like we're just kind of gatekeeping a little bit in that
Mhm.
sense. Like, because you mentioned, and I've seen it where these tools can benefit the whole class, greatly. So, in your experience, and maybe with, your personal experience, or, talking to teachers now that you've been out on the road, what would you say are some of the barriers currently in the classrooms that you're seeing with, tools such as Read Speaker, being used?
Lack of knowledge and resistance to change. Um, having taught as long as I did, I knew I knew which faculty members would, I don't want to say balk me, but be somewhat resistant to anything that was a change because that's not the way they had always taught and that was not their comfort level. Now, getting the faculty member over to being comfortable with the change, then they're going to do things differently. One of the things that I look at is a student that has accommodations. Now, unless that's time and a half or double time for taking a test, most of those accommodations can be made available to all the students, and that lets the student that needs the accommodation build self confidence, build self esteem, more independence, willing to question things, whereas before they're intimidated. So they draw within themselves. So by opening these tools up to everyone and not just, oh, I can only do these 5 people or these 50 people, I can't do all 5,000. You know, once you open it up to everyone, then it's no longer a stigma to those that need them. And you will find things where those that are accustomed to using the tools will teach some of the students who don't know how to use the tools how to do it. Because they'll say, oh, I found this little trick. Let me do that. It becomes a sharing and a compromise of different, not compromise, but a combination of different ideas that help all the students. And that lack of knowledge or resistance to change can be hard for faculty, especially if they've been teaching a long time. And my suggestion is the first day of class is always nerve-wracking for everyone, right? You go in, your stomach is in knots thinking, oh, what kind of class am I going to have? Are they all going to be great? Am I going to have to struggle because someone really learned so differently that I got to figure out how to say things? I remember a time frame when I had a student who was English. She was born and raised in England. And she did not know some of the words that I was using because they were not words that she would use in Britain. For instance, I used the word drapes, like your drapes on your window. She didn't know what that was. Those were curtains. It wasn't she didn't know how to do the application. She didn't know the verbiage. So the whole time I was writing word problems, and I know we call them applications to hide the fact that they're word problems, but the whole time I was writing them, I kept trying to think, in the Queen's English, what else could this be called? Because I know she's going to ask me that. So those type things come into play. It makes you aware, but you've got to embrace that change. And in doing so, you become the sage on the side and you're not chalk and talk anymore. And then you become not just the sage on the side, but a participant. And that's a whole nother step. One of the ways that I suggest starting class that first day is to have something playing with text to speech where the words are being highlighted and played along as the students come in the classroom. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look up there, how are you doing that? And that gives you the chance to say, I'm using this tool right here. You don't like my colors? You don't like my voice? Change it. I dare you. You've thrown down the gauntlet. They are going to jump at that and they are going to start going for, how can I break it? What can I do to break it? She's told me I can't break it. And they're going to try out every tool, every little nuance, and they're going to find things that resonate with them. Not every student is going to use the tools. You've got to be ready for that. But at the same point in time, you got to be ready for the student that's using all the tools too, because they're going to know it better than you do. And that's okay. That's okay. Let them show the class how to do something. It's all right when the students teach the students. And that's hard to let go and do.
Oh, absolutely correct. I mean, you hit on so many great things, in this section alone. And I think what it all comes down to, one of the things that really sticks out the most that you mentioned is the this is the way we've always done it approach.
Hmm.
It's something that never changes and something that as much as we try to change and be forward thinking, we always revert back to what's comfortable. And we see that often. But one thing that I love that you said is, well, a couple of things actually. Number one, it's okay to not know everything as a
Hmm.
teacher. Number two, it's great that you can learn from your students because they're using the tech. And for example, if you have a student that comes in that is already using various tools because they may need those accommodations, why not learn from that and then, bring it out to everybody in the class and they can demonstrate and show, hey, look, this is what is available because that could definitely benefit somebody else in the room, like you said, and
Hmm.
reap the rewards from that. So that is just something that is amazing there. I did want to highlight this comment from Tanya, who's been joining us here in the chat, and she mentions she says here, Ginger, you're describing my brain as an ELL in elementary. So there you go. So that's the connection there. So, and Ginger, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with Read Speaker. Tell us a little bit more about what Read Speaker can bring into the classroom to help our students and your experience in using it as well.
Well, first off, my role is basically think of me as a faculty trainer. I onboard, I train, I retrain, whatever type of educational needs you have for ReadSpeaker, I do them. I create videos. So, in doing all of that, I poke around in all the nuances, like the student trying to break it. I play in those. And then I stop and step back and say, what would I use this for? When would I use it? And you were commenting about I'm back home. I've been on the road for 3 weeks, back and forth between the East and West Coast, but I had the pleasure of talking with a gentleman this past week who was dyslexic. And we all know dyslexia does not mean that the letters have to be reversed. It means that there is a learning challenge there. But he was telling me, I was describing our text mode where you can pull the window in narrow so that your eye movements are going straight down. They're not going left, right anymore. And that really helps a student who's ADD or ADHD. And another thing you can do with that is put space between characters. And he said, that's the most marvelous thing there is about ReadSpeaker. I'm dyslexic. I use Arial as my font, but I'm dyslexic, and that extra space between the characters, if it's a word I don't know, I have the ability to sound it out because I can see each character individually. That blew me away. Never had I thought of those two things together for dyslexia. Sure, they're great if you uh, have decoding issues, but somehow or another in my brain, I did not associate decoding with dyslexia. How, I don't know, but that connection just happened this past week. So to me, it's little things like that that make those tools so valuable. Um, you ask about what I do and what tools that I encourage. I encourage customization. Our tools allow you to choose your voice, your word, your sentence, your font size, I should say word sentence color, your font size, your background color, and the space between characters, your reading speed, and your reading voice. So you get to choose all of that, and it hides in the cookies and cache of that browser. So if you don't ever dump your cookies and cache, it's going to stay there. But now, if you're like me and you shop on Amazon and eBay and several other places like that, you're probably going to have to dump your cookies and cache occasionally. So you might have to set it back up. I'm also an old DOS user. When I started my computer programming, I hate to say this, it shows you how old I am. We were working on mainframes with key punch machines. Okay? And terminals came out and you had DOS controls, like Control A to select everything that was on the screen, or Control C to copy something, Control V to paste it. You know, we all use those, but I became a heavy user of it. And one of the things about our tools is our keyboard settings. For those students that are keyboard users, you pick what you want to be each command. We have a command there, but you can say, I don't want that, exit out and put another one in its place. So most of your DOS commands are on your left hand. So I put my read speaker controls on my right hand, because then I'm just using my keyboard, which is a whole lot easier than me making my mouse go where I want it to go, because mine is an infrared mouse, and sometimes a piece of dust on that infrared dot, my mouse goes sailing, not where I intended it to go. And then I'm like, come on. And then I'm cleaning the mouse and everything. So if I just use my keyboard commands, I don't bump into that problem. So that customization, it becomes a part of you. It's no longer a foreign entity. It is yours. You've made it yours. That's like I was saying, I like a yellow sentence with a blue word because I like bright, vibrant colors. If I'm using pastels, I just don't engage. But give me something bright and I'm right there on it.
Excellent. Well, guys, for those of you watching and are going to be catching this on the replay and everything, please make sure you visit www.readspeaker.com so you can check out definitely all of the tools and everything that Ginger was talking about. And you'll get a lot more information there about what Read Speaker can do, not only for yourself, but for your class and how it can help everybody. It's not just for those select few students that need it. Think outside the box. Think how this can benefit all students all at once, and reap the rewards about that. And also, just like Ginger said, just encourage you all to stay curious and really learn from your students. And this is just something that is amazing. So one of the things, Ginger, that I did want to add that I really loved and I never thought about really was when you were talking about the listening portion of it, where you can have a certain voice for a different or different set of voice or voices for classes that you're taking. And I never thought about the importance of that. I never heard about that up until now. And I think that's something that's valuable that I'm definitely going to be sharing that clip with our district too as well, just so they can go ahead and check that out. And, obviously this whole episode, you definitely dropped some amazing gems of knowledge, and I'm definitely very thankful for that.
You're but you're welcome. I have one thing that is a quote that stays in my mind all the time, and it's something Abraham Lincoln said. And he's talking about he uses two senses when he reads. First, he uses his eyes and he sees it. Then he uses his ears and he hears it. Therefore, he can remember it. Now, that's not the direct quote, but that's the essence of the quote. And I think about that, and we were working on a new LMS integration, and I didn't have the word movements yet. And I was like, I'm not seeing it. I'm not getting what's on the page. And it hit me how important the two things are together. When a kid's learning to read, they put their finger underneath the word. That's the same thing as highlighting it. They're using that.
Wow. That, again, oh my goodness. See, these are those like knowledge nuggets that I wish I would have known more about when I was in the classroom. And of course, as curious as I can be, it coming and again transitioning from business into education and being in the classroom, uh, sometimes I didn't get to see all of that or experience all of that, or maybe sometimes a lot of times it wasn't explained well to me that I wish that if I can go back with as much knowledge as you've given me, I would definitely, be doing a lot more in my classroom, to bring these tools out and about. And I'm hoping that, this message resonates with so many that are going to be listening, because this was definitely just a powerful share altogether that I'm definitely digesting right now as we speak, but also that I'll be digesting later on as I'm cutting clips, because there was so many things that you said that really stood out. So I'm very thankful for you being here today, and thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing, the work that you've done with your students. Obviously, those knowledge nuggets that I'm going to sprinkle on to what I'm already doing great. And I know that our educators will too as well. And so I'm definitely very thankful for that. But before we wrap up, Ginger, this is our closing segment where I always ask my guests the final three questions. And this segment is definitely sponsored by Alongside Care. So we understand that every student deserves personalized and trustworthy mental health support. And Alongside Care is here to help ensure that no additional burdens are placed on faculty and staff, whether a student is seeking guidance or a counselor aiming to provide the best for your students. Alongside is definitely going to be your partner. So thank you, Alongside, for being a sponsor of My EdTech Life and being a sponsor of this show and this segment. So, Ginger, are you ready for our final three questions?
I think so.
All right. Here we go, Ginger. Question number one. In the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
Ah, lack of knowledge and lack of funding.
Right?
I have learned a lot from a lot of people, done a lot of reading, had a lot of mentors going along, and giving that knowledge to other people is where I see lack of knowledge. I don't know how to get it to them. This is one of the few times I've had the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned. So that lack of me being able to pass on, lack of funding, getting the tools in the students' hands.
Great answer. Your great answer. All right, here we go. Question number two. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
My billboard would say something along the lines, all students, and that would be in caps, need accessible materials and text to speech. The reason why is you don't know who needs it, but if you make it accessible, then the student that needs it has it in a form they can use it. And text speech, except for the student who is deaf, seems to resonate. I taught College 101 also while I was there, and that's a college success class. And we did what was called, and I'll use the wrong term now, learning preferences. Then it became learning styles. I just call it ways of learning. Okay. And when we would measure which was their stronghold, I saw many students that were visual with auditory very close, or the reverse of that, auditory with visual very close. I got a few tactile learners, and believe it or not, audio was their backup. That shows how important the text speech element is. because it is a backup, if not the primary form of learning.
Excellent. Great answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. And the last question, Ginger, is if you can turn one of your hobbies or favorite activities into a profession, which would you choose?
My crafts. I do a lot of knitting, crocheting, beadwork, making ornaments that fit any season of the year, stuff like this. It used to be my therapy when I got home from work to keep from busting a gasket with my kids. I had to just flow down a little bit. And I've always enjoyed that my whole life. In fact, that was my exit plan for when I left teaching. When I left work, I was going to go and do crafts and sell them. So that would be what I would do. But I also don't want to do it because I don't want to make my hobby into work.
There you go. All right, good answer. Well, Ginger, thank you so much again. Like honestly, this was such a just a blessing of a conversation. Like it really filled me with number one, a lot of knowledge. Number two, a lot of things to think about and ponder on my practice in the classroom, but now also for from this moment going forward and you know just kind of trying to change mindsets now and now that I have a greater understanding and being curious about all of this too as well. I really thank you because it's always great when I have a guest that really just ignites that curiosity again and makes me want to like, hey, I need to dive into this a lot more because there might be an opportunity for me to
Mhm.
do more for not only the teachers, and but for the students as well and making a positive impact. So thank you honestly so much for that. That really is great. And I'm just really thankful for everything that you shared. And obviously Tanya here too as well. She's very thankful. She was very active throughout the whole show. And again, for all our audience members that are going to be checking out this episode and previous episodes, again, you definitely dropped some great knowledge nuggets there that they can sprinkle onto what they are already doing great. So thank you so much for being here and maybe, and again, I also want to let you know that as a guest of the My EdTech Life podcast, you always have an open invite to come back. And if you would love to continue to this conversation, we would definitely love to have you back as well. So you always have an open invite, Ginger. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
All
you.
all right, guys. So, again, thank you so much for joining us live. And for all our audience members that are going to be checking out this episode on the replay, please make sure you go to our YouTube channel, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. It'll mean a lot to us as we continue to grow. But also, you can visit our website at www.myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 213 wonderful episodes with amazing educators, creators, practitioners, and just passionate educators that share also their knowledge and their experience so you can take those knowledge nuggets and sprinkle them onto what you are already doing great. And if you'd love to contribute to our mission of connecting educators and creators one show at a time, please make sure you stop by our merch store as well. That is in our website. So you can get yourself a cap, a shirt, and all of that goes back into our podcast. So we can continue to bring you some amazing conversations and, amazing guests like Ginger to help sharpen our skills. As you know, iron sharpens iron. And so, again, we definitely want to bring you some guests that will definitely get you thinking, get you curious again, and of course, just picking up those knowledge nuggets that you can continue to use. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for all of your support, my friends. And as always, don't forget, until next time, stay techie.